So hi, Michael. Hi, Ernesto. Today's topic is about money. And the question goes like this. If the problem of money is not money as such, but the attachment to money, how do you deal with situations such as the fact that economic abundance arrives in your life? In other words, if the self is fullness and the ego is lack and limitation manifested in this world, is it possible that someone's vasana, that they don't deserve money, manifests itself instead of a true inner renunciation?
Right. Um, yeah. Well, firstly, yes, it is true, but money itself is not a problem. It's our desire for an attachment to money that is the problem. Why does desire for money and consequent attachment to money, why does it arise? It arises like all other desires because our real nature is infinite happiness. And that is our infinite happiness, infinite being, infinite awareness. That is, we are the the paripurna vastu. That's the total reality. But when we rise as ego, we limit ourselves to within the confines of a body, which is limited within time and in space. So, as ego, we are always dissatisfied. That is, ego is finite and it attaches itself, it identifies itself with finite things. So, it can never experience infinite happiness. But without experiencing infinite happiness, it's always dissatisfied. So, dissatisfaction is the very nature of ego. So, when we raise as ego, we want to try to um, fill that hole of dissatisfaction. But of course, uh, we we cannot attain satisfaction without experiencing ourselves as we actually are, because only when we experience ourselves as we actually are will we experience the infinite happiness, which is our real nature. So um, there's all that is we as ego we always feel something is lacking. We always want to try to make up for something. um, that's how all desires manifest. Desire for money is uh, one very prevalent desire um, because we identify ourselves with a body. We need food, clothing, and shelter. That's basically the basic needs: food, clothing, air, shelter. The basic needs for the survival of the body. But we live in a world where these things don't always come very easily. There are a lot of other people in the world, and people are greedy, and people try to take more for themselves. And because we live in a money-based economy, money represents. If you've got money, you've got seemingly you have security. I mean, if you've got a few million euros in the bank, you're unlikely to be starving the next day. So you can buy a house, so you've got a permanent shelter over your head, but even if you've got all that you need to provide all the food, clothing, and shelter you would ever need for yourself and for your family, people are still not satisfied because dissatisfaction is the very nature of ego. So even people who have millions, they want tens or hundreds of millions. Even those who have hundreds of millions, they want billions. And even those who have billions, they want hundreds of billions. So there is no there is no satisfying the desire for money. Very few people are content with what money they have. And if you can be content with the money you've got, you can be content with a little money as well as with a lot of money. So the problem is internal. The problem is our desire and attachment. A person who is free of desire and attachment will live a contented life with very few material things. They will feel they have very few material needs. Whereas a person with a lot of desire and attachment, they will always feel they need more and more and more. So but as the question says, the problem is not money. The problem is our desire and attachment for money.
And Michael, the root of the attachment is the sense of lack.
Yeah, ultimately, yes, because the very nature of ego is always to be dissatisfied, because our real nature is infinite happiness. Infinite happiness means infinite satisfaction.
Mhm.
When we limit ourselves, when we rise as ego, we always identify ourselves with a form, with a body. And that body is limited. It's limited in time, in space, and in so many ways it's limited. So as a seemingly limited entity, we cannot experience the infinite happiness that is our real nature. So we always feel something is lacking. That is why is the mind always so restless? Why are we always thinking so many thoughts about this or that? We're constantly looking for some sort of satisfaction outside ourselves. What are the things we think about? We think about the things that we think will contribute to our happiness or detract from our happiness. If we think these things are going to detract from our happiness, we want to avoid them. If we think they're going to contribute to our happiness, we want them. So this desire to fill this feeling of dissatisfaction, this feeling of lack, is what drives all mental activity. If we were perfectly content with our present state, we wouldn't need to think anything. We'd just be happy just to keep quiet. But we all know how difficult it is to keep the mind quiet, because the mind is always restless because of this dissatisfaction. This may manifest in different forms in different people. For some people, money is very important. For other people, certain types of sensual pleasures are important, or certain intellectual pleasures are important, but different things are important to different people. But most of us, in some form or other, we have a desire for money, because money is the means of material exchange by which we acquire the things that we require to live, food, clothing, and shelter. So there are very few who are completely devoid of desire for money. But as I say, the problem is the desire for money is, the money is outside, the desire for money is inside. So since the desire for money is the problem, not only the desire for money, but desire for anything is a problem, we have to deal with it internally. It is possible, as you were saying earlier, but we can live a life of renunciation. We can outwardly renounce. But just because outwardly we renounce things doesn't mean that we're inwardly free of that attachment. For example, a person may decide they don't want the worldly pleasures, they want to go and live in a monastery and become a monk or a nun or something. But that's another type of security. So it's another way in which we're trying to find some security, some identity, some role in life, which will give us it gives us an identity, and it gives us a certain measure of security, thinking that we have a particular identity. So the outward renunciation may be beneficial under some circumstances. It may be suitable for some people, but the real work, whether we've outwardly renounced or not, the real work is internal. It's the internal renunciation which is necessary. And in order to renounce fully, we cannot renounce fully without renouncing ego, because ego is the root of all the desire and attachment. So long as ego is present, there will be desire and attachment. We may be able to reduce the strength of our desires and attachments, but we cannot get rid of them entirely so long as we remain as ego. So our aim is to surrender this ego completely. We cannot surrender the ego completely so long as we've got strong desires and attachment. So we do have to reduce the strength of our desires and attachment in order to be willing to surrender this ego. But the means by which we ultimately surrender the ego, and by which in the meanwhile we surrender we reduce the strength of our desires and attachment, it's the same means. That is the path of self-investigation and self-surrender. when we are turning our attention within, we are withdrawing it from the external things. So we are slowly weaning the mind off its attachment to external things. External things doesn't only mean the money and the objects of the world, even the internal thing, even the things that normally we think of the mind or thoughts as internal and the world external. But in the sense in which Bhagavan talks about internal and external, according to Bhagavan, what is internal is only I. Even the thoughts and the feelings and the desires, these are all external. They're anya, they're things other than ourselves. So in order, when we turn our attention within, that's towards I, we are letting go not only of the external things, we are letting go of the thoughts about them, the desires about them, the attachments about them. So slowly, by following this path that Bhagavan has taught us, we are weaning our mind off our desires and attachments. So the desires and attachments become weaker, and eventually we become willing to surrender ourselves. And how do we surrender ourselves? By exactly the same means. So this path of self-investigation and self-surrender that Bhagavan has given us is the best means to purify our mind. Purify our mind means to reduce the strength of our desires and attachments, and eventually it will root out the ego. So this is all we really need. However, so long as we still have desires and attachments, we are not willing to let go of external things. So often we may delude ourselves. As you were saying, if, for example, we are unemployed, we're not able to get a job, we have very little money, we're struggling to get by, we may delude ourselves thinking, okay, I have no attachment to money, that's why I'm living in this way. So it's possible we can delude ourselves in this way. But if we are serious about following the spiritual path means turning our attention within. If we are serious about this, we will not delude ourselves in this way. That is, if we are really trying to turn our attention within, we will see very clearly the strength of our desires and attachments. So we won't be able to delude ourselves into thinking, but really we don't have desire and attachment when we do have. We cannot turn our attention back towards I without thereby becoming very painfully aware of the strength of our desires and attachments. Because most of us, when we try to turn our attention towards I, it keeps on bouncing out again. And we keep on thinking of other things. Why is that? Because we are not willing to let go of those other things. Why are we not willing to let go of them? Because of our desires and attachments. Desires and attachments are a manifest form of what are called vasanas, our inclinations. We have this inclination. The Vishaya vasana means the inclination to be aware of Vishaya. Vishaya means phenomena. So as ego, we depend on phenomena without grasping phenomena, without grasping form, as Bhagavan says. We cannot rise, stand, and flourish as ego. So as ego, we are totally dependent on the forms that we grasp, on the phenomena that we experience. So we have very strong desire and attachment for these things. So in this spiritual path, this path of self-investigation and self-surrender, we are slowly weaning our mind off its desires and attachments. But the more we wean our mind off its desires and attachments, the purer our mind becomes, and therefore the more clearly we see how strong our desires and attachments are. So if we are truly following this path, we cannot delude ourselves, thinking that we are making progress, that we have renounced and everything. Bhagavan was, in some books it's written that Bhagavan was opposed to external renunciation. Bhagavan was neither for nor against external renunciation. He said all these things are according to destiny. Everything that happens in our external life is according to destiny. So if we're destined to be married and to have 10 children, we'll be married and have 10 children. If we're destined to be a monk or a nun and to live in a monastery, or to be a parivrajika sannyasi wandering around begging our food, will happen. I mean, we can't avoid what is destined to happen. That doesn't mean we can't try to avoid it. I may have great desire. I want to become a monk. I want to be a renunciate. But if it's my destiny to be to have a job and to be married and have 10 children and to have all sorts of worldly problems, I cannot give up those things even if I want to. So we shouldn't be concerned about the external nature of our life, whether it's a life of wealth or a life of poverty or a life of renunciation or a life of involved in worldly activities. What is important is turning our attention within. So whether there are examples in the Puranas of for example, King Janaka. He was a king. He had as a king, he had so many responsibilities, but at the same time, he was a jnani. Inwardly, he had renounced everything. And there are other kings. Krishna was a king. Rama was a king. So it's possible to be a renunciate even in the midst of wealth. And it's equally possible to be fully attached in poverty. So, but there were jnanis who had no material possessions at all, like Bhagavan. He had nothing. True, an ashram grew up around him, but he never felt this is mine. It was the ashram was built by the devotees for the devotees. Bhagavan never felt any connection with that. So
one thing, Michael, there are these two perspectives or these two approaches to spirituality that I see for what you say, because while we have still desires and attachments, and once we have, because money is also an external thing, as you say, and it's predetermined by karma, whether we're going to have a middle-class income, or we're going to be millionaires, or we're going to be poor. It's everything external is going to be predetermined.
Yes.
So if we truly innerly renounce to external things, we're not going to care at all about money. I mean, we will be meant to look for a job. If we are destined to look for a job, to find it, etc. And on the other hand, it's while we still have these desires and attachments, and we are experiencing this lack or scarcity of money, and we are not truly renouncing still because we are attached to money, and we still think we can do something. We can influence. We can have some influence on the situations because we don't truly renounce. So in that sense, some people think that, for example, having negative beliefs about money, it could like break the flow of money or something, because you think that money is something that corrupts the world, it's evil, it's not
the spiritual.
It contributes to the corruption of people, organizations, etc. And that creates unconsciously maybe an energy that is going to block the flow of money, and it's going to perpetuate the constant state of lack, scarcity, etc. Whereas if you have a more positive approach, let's say, or more neutral approach, that could have another impact. But as you say, it's from two different perspectives.
So, because according to Bhagavan, it's all according to prarabdha. Prarabdha is what is preordained. It's the fruits of karmas, not karmas we've done in this lifetime, but karmas we've done in previous lifetimes. Yeah. So nothing we can do can block the flow of money or can increase the flow of money. It's already predetermined.
Not even changing your beliefs about it. I mean,
but
changing
about the idea that money is evil. Money is, what is it? It's just numbers on a computer screen or piece of paper or pieces of metal. It's neither good nor bad. But the evil lies in our greed for money. So, but we live in a world with a certain economic system. We all know this economic system in the world is extremely unjust, because if we had a just and fair economic system, we wouldn't have people like Jeff Bezos with hundreds of billions of dollars, and millions of people not even have enough to meet the basic needs, the basic requirements of food and so on. So we obviously live in a bad economic system, but it's nobody has yet devised a perfect economic system. The problem with economic systems Even if you have an ideal like we should have communism, all should be equal, it's a nice ideal. I mean, the world would be a better place if everyone could be equal. But the problem with any system you design to make the world a fairer place is, what are the ingredients of that system? It's all the individuals who make up that system. And as individuals, we all, to a greater or less extent, we tend to be greedy. We all want a little bit more. So it's, so long as greed is there, you will never have a perfectly fair world. And so long as ego is there, there will be greed. So we cannot, as I say, it's easy to say, but the system is evil. In the sense, the system is evil. But why is the system evil? Where is the root of evil? It's in the egos who make up that system. It's the greed of all the individuals who make up that system that makes it evil. So the real evil lies within us. We cannot rectify the greed in other people. We can only rectify the greed in ourselves. And how do we rectify the greed in ourselves? Greed is just an excessive desire. But how do we rectify the desire? Let's say, let's not even go as far as greed. How do we rectify the desire, which is the root of disease? What is the root of desire? It's ourself. Who is it who has desire? I do. So it's that I, that ego, that is when we identify ourselves as a body. When we rise as ego, we automatically project and identify ourselves as a body. And consequently, we seem to have so many needs. This body does need clean air, it does need fresh water, it does need food, it does need adequate clothing to protect us from the hot sun or from the cold winters or whatever. We need all these things as a body. But do we need to be a body? That's what Bhagavan asks. Once when Bhagavan had a devotee, Kavyaganta Ganapati Muni, he was supposed to be a great poet in Sanskrit and everything, and a very learned person. But he was always trying to, he wasn't really a spiritual person, but instead of desiring annihilation of ego, he wanted to acquire Shakti and Siddhis and to reform the world. He had so many aims and ambitions. But anyway, he experimented with so many different types of spiritual practice. And one time he was very interested in living a very simple, materially a very simple life. So he once said to Bhagavan, it seems to me that we can live for just 3 rupees a month. And Bhagavan said, we can live without the body. Why then 3 rupees? So Bhagavan goes right to the very basis. We don't need it. We can simplify our life externally. We probably all have more than we need materially. But even if we reduce our lives to a very, very simple material life, the desire and attachment is still there because we are still attached to this body. Bhagavan goes to the root. The problem is our attachment to this body. Why do we rise as ego and attach ourselves to this body? So because Bhagavan's path is dealing with the very root, which is ego, it deals with all the problems associated with ego, all the vasanas, the desires, the attachments, and so on. So Bhagavan's teachings are focused on rooting out this ego. That's the whole purpose of Bhagavan's teaching. What is ego? Ego is nothing but a false awareness of ourselves, an awareness of ourselves as something other than what we actually are. What we actually are is, as he says in verse 28, I think, of Upadesh Undya, if we know our real nature, then anadi, that means beginningless, ananta, endless, limitless, infinite, akanda, unbroken, undivided, satchidananda, that is our real nature. If we were aware of ourselves as such, we would be perfectly satisfied. We wouldn't need anything. But we are not aware of ourselves as that. We are aware of ourselves as if we have this little body. So all these problems arise because of our rising as ego. So if we investigate ourselves and see what we actually are, ego will thereby be eradicated, because ego is nothing but a false awareness of ourselves. And all the problems associated with ego will come to an end. And since all problems are associated with ego, because for whom are all problems? For me. That's for ego. In sleep, we have no problems. Why do we have no problems in sleep? Because we as ego are absent there. We remain there as in our real nature. When we rise as ego, then all the problems come. The desires, the attachments, the vasanas, and so on and so forth. And so Bhagavan's teachings are always focusing on the very root. If we follow Bhagavan's path correctly, that is, we're focusing, if we're trying to turn our attention, instead of the natural flow of the mind is to go outwards, we're trying to turn the flow of the mind to go inwards. That means back towards I. So to the extent that we do that, we will extricate ourselves from all these entanglements in which we've got ourselves caught up. So if we are not following this path, then we can delude ourselves in so many ways. Oh, I'm a renunciate. I have no desire for money. We can delude ourselves in so many ways. But if when we try to turn within, then only do we see very clearly how much desire and attachment we still have. So any person who is genuinely following Bhagavan's path will not feel, oh, I'm a renunciate, I have given up everything, I have no attachment, I have no desire. Because the more we go within, though our mind is being purified, that means though our desires and attachments are being reduced in strength, the more they're reduced in strength, the more clearly we are able to see how strong they are. So and when the desires and to the extent that desires and attachments are reduced in strength, to that extent our mind is clarified. And in the clear mind, we can see how strong the residual vasanas are. So that is why if you read what Bhagavan has written in Arunachal Stuti Panchakam, in so many verses he's praying as if he's the very worst of the worst. In fact, in one verse, he's in Arunachal Patikam, he says, Paramanim padum patrarap patrum paravari variril paraman. He says, I am the supreme among those who are so foolish not to be attached, not to be attached to your feet, to the feet of you, the supreme. So I am the supreme in my attachment to in my lack of attachment to you who are free of attachment. So Bhagavan is, why he's saying like that? Because as the mind, Bhagavan, of course, he had attained everything. He had gone beyond all these things. In those verses, what he prayed in those verses is reflecting the mind of a devotee who is advanced along the path, but has still not completely eradicated ego. So the more we advance along the path, the more we will see how totally unfit we are. How much we still have a desire and attachment and so on. So if we are genuinely following Bhagavan's path, we don't have to worry about, oh, am I fooling myself that I've renounced? If we think we've renounced, yes, we're fooling ourselves. But if we're really following Bhagavan's path, we won't feel we've renounced anything. We will feel, I still haven't started. I've been trying to follow this path for 40 years, but I still feel I haven't really started. Because we still are aware of how much desire and attachment is still there. We may have made good progress in the last 40, 50 years, or however long we've been practicing it. But to us, it will seem like we haven't made progress at all, because we are more clearly aware of the strength of our desires and attachments now than we were 40 or 50 years ago. Because then our mind wasn't so pure. Now our mind is more purified. So the sign of a pure mind is to be clearly aware of the residual impurities.
Yeah. And Michael,
if you've got a very dirty cloth, the whole cloth looks dirty. But if you begin to clean it, then only you see the deep-rooted stains. That you may be able to remove the superficial dirt, but then the deep-rooted stains become clearly visible. And you see how much more cleaning there is still to be done. Like the mind is like that. The more we purify the mind, the more we become aware of the deep-rooted desires and attachments.
Yeah. And Michael, would it be good, for example, for a person who is following Bhagavan's teachings, but many times as egos, it's natural that people feel that if something something goes wrong in our lives, we think that, oh, I'm doing something unconsciously, I'm doing something wrong, or I don't have the right beliefs or whatever. For example, if I have scarcity of money, or I don't have a partner, or whatever, those beliefs would be good to change that belief, instead of or having that attitude to say like, okay, this scarcity is going to be beneficial to my spiritual development in a way.
Yes.
It's given to me because I have to go through this to relinquish the desire for money, or to give up my attachment to money, or about something.
Sorry, because Carlos, Michael, sometimes we see, no, in the relation with the friends, no, of Yo Soy Tu Mismo, no, some people begin to develop an attachment to the scarcity, to the to the lack.
Yeah.
Right.
The ego makes a very subtle attachment for the form of I am lack, no? And this I am lack is good for me because I read in the Padma, for example, the preliminaries that Muruganar recommend us about of a simple way of life, no? And the ego are locked in this idea of I am lack is good for me. Some people go to a monastery, how you said before, because in the unconsciously think, I have meal there, I have a bed there, I'm covered. No? But they tell us.
It's a type of security, and it's also an identity. If you go to a monastery, I am a monk, I am a spiritual person, all these things are there. So that is why Bhagavan wasn't at all concerned about the external life, because he said that's all according to destiny. What Bhagavan focused on is the internal life, the internal renunciation. So, as I say, if we are following the Bhagavan's path sincerely, correctly, we will not be able to fool ourselves in thinking that we have renounced. Because truly speaking, according to Bhagavan, the only true renunciation is renunciation of ego. So long as ego is still there, we have not renounced. So Bhagavan said, the grahasta, that means the household, the person, family person, who doesn't feel I am a family person, is a better sannyasi than the sannyasi who feels I am a sannyasi. Sannyasi means one who has renounced. So it's the internal renunciation that we need to get, that is required. If we, due to our destiny, we may be very poor. We may be unemployed. We may not be able to get a job. We may be able to, but if we then feel, that our lack of wealth is itself a sign of our spirituality, that's again an identification. I am a poor person. I am free of all these desires and attachments. Again, it's all ego. See, Bhagavan said, I am this or that. That is ego. I am alone. That is our real nature. To think I am this or that, even to think I am Brahman, or to think I am poor, or to think I'm the lowest of the low, it's all an identification. What we actually are is, that is why Bhagavan said, the only true expression of our identity is I am I. To identify ourselves with anything other than I is a false identity. So even to think I am Brahman is false, because Brahman doesn't need to think I am Brahman. Brahman is just as it is, doesn't need to think anything. So long as we're thinking I am Brahman, that is, we are Brahman, but we shouldn't think I am Brahman, because by thinking I am Brahman, it's an identification. As Bhagavan said in verse 27 of Uludinabdu, he said it very beautifully. Nadu udiyada ulanile, namaduvai ulanile. That is the state in which we exist without rising as I, without I rising, that is the state in which we are that. So long as we rise as ego, we in effect, we are not Brahman. We always are Brahman, but we seem to be something other than Brahman by raising his ego. If we want to experience ourselves as Brahman, which is what we actually are, we just have to cease raising his ego.
And that, I think that is the verse that you wrote is the best safeguard against fooling oneself, because
Yes.
I mean, is true renunciation is only the final ultimate eradication of ego.
Yeah.
There is no possible fooling oneself, because I mean, when if you fool yourself into thinking, okay, then it's not a renunciation. And if you is a true renunciation, you're going to say it.
One statement that is always false, is always necessarily false, is I am a renunciate. Because so long as there's an I to say I am a renunciate, we haven't yet renounced that I. The true renunciation is only the renunciation of I.
And there will also be...
Can I just say one more thing about the question you were asking Carlos earlier and everything? All this is that is, two things are necessary. Firstly, we need to try our best to follow what Bhagavan has taught us, but it's also necessary that we have a clear understanding of Bhagavan's teachings. So often reading Bhagavan's original writings, thinking about them deeply, applying them to our life, and putting them into practice, of course, this will give us a clearer and clearer understanding of our of his teachings, and it'll be more difficult for us to fool ourselves if we understand Bhagavan's teachings clearly. If we've only half understood Bhagavan's teachings, we may be able to fool ourselves. That is why Bhagavan said, in this path, it's not so much a matter of learning as of unlearning. That is, all our preconceived ideas, beliefs, and so on, we need to be willing to give up all these beliefs and to completely wipe the slate clean. Then only we will correctly understand Bhagavan's teachings. So long as we are mixing Bhagavan's teachings with other false preconceived ideas that we've got, we are not understanding them clearly. As Sadhu Om used to say, if you bring me a slate in which that is, in old days in India, children used to use slates with a piece of chalk to write notes in class or whatever. So he said, if you bring me, and even Murugan, he used to often write his verses on slates. It was just a very common thing in those days to use a slate and chalk. So Sadhu Om said, if you bring me a slate that's fully scribbled and you ask me to write Bhagavan's name on it, first I will wipe the slate clean and then I will write Bhagavan's name. Then only you will see the beauty of Bhagavan's name. If I, instead of wiping the slate clean, if I just write Ramana over all the scribblings, Bhagavan's beautiful name will just be lost among all the scribblings. It'll become another one among the many scribblings there. Likewise, if you want to understand Bhagavan's teachings fully, you need to be willing to give up all your preconceived ideas, beliefs, notions, and everything. So we all have ideas about renunciation, but most of the ideas that we have before we come to Bhagavan are very crude understanding of what true spirituality is. Bhagavan gives us a very refined understanding of what true spirituality is.
Yes, I want to say something, Michael, that there will also be people who need to develop their ability to get a job, for example, or earn money, etc., for later, if they will be able to aspire to a true internal renunciation, to real true internal renunciation, no? What's your opinion about this?
I wouldn't even say that. Because all these things are according to destiny. You can try and develop your ability to earn money. You can go on training courses, you can get qualifications and everything. But if you're destined to be unemployed, you'll be unemployed. You may have all the PhDs and the doctorates and so many other whatever other qualifications, but if you're destined to be unemployed, you'll be unemployed.
Yeah, but the Prarabdha articles in this life a través de through the thoughts, the vrittis, no? The Prarabdha is occurs in this life through these vrittis, through the thoughts that we have, no?
Well,
And
there are two things. That is, there are three instruments of action. There's mind, speech, and body. These three instruments of action are being used by, there are two powers that are driving this. One power is prarabdha. But prarabdha makes us think those thoughts, say those words, and do those actions that are required in order for us to experience what is destined to happen. So if, for example, if you are destined to have an accident, say, you will decide, oh, I'll just go pop out to a shop and buy some vegetables or fruit or some rice or something. And so that thought process is then you go out and you try and cross the road and you're hit by a car. Because it's your destiny to be hit by a car, you are made to think, to make that decision at that time to do all those things. So some of the thoughts we think are according to destiny. I mean, that's a small thing, that is an immediate thing. But there are other bigger things, like if it's your destiny, for example, to be a doctor. In order to be a doctor, you have to study for so many years. So you'll be prompted to do those actions that are necessary in order to qualify yourself to be a doctor, in order to work as a doctor. So prarabdha is driving many of the actions of our mind, speech, and body. But that doesn't mean all the actions of our mind, speech, and body are driven by prarabdha, because at the same time we have our will, we have our likes and dislikes. I have a great liking to be a doctor. It may not be my destiny to be a doctor, but I can try and study to be a doctor. I can sit the exams and everything and fail and be disappointed. And so we made many of the actions we do. That is, some actions we do are driven only by prarabdha. None of us want to cross the road and be hit by a car. But somehow we inadvertently make a misjudgment. We think we can rush across the road before the car comes. We misjudge it and we're hit by the car. Or the car driver is looking somewhere else and he doesn't slow down enough, whatever it is. So certain actions are driven only by prarabdha. They're not what we would want. Certain actions are driven only by our will. They're not at all, they've got nothing to do with prarabdha, it's just what we want. But many of the actions that we do are driven by a combination of prarabdha and our will.
But Michael, in ultimate case, we can have too many thoughts that we don't know that we have it. This thought, for example, imagine, no, you say, today at the night, I will have an accident, no?
Yeah.
And I don't know that what I was thinking this morning, to think that I desire to go to the road, to have a simple. I go out of my house, I take a car, I begin to drive, and these thoughts that are unconsciousness are part of the Prarabdha's way to finally create the extent of what I need, what I desire to live. No?
Our life is not going according to what we experience in our life is not according to is not driven by our desire in this lifetime. What we experience in this life is all determined by prarabdha. Prarabdha is the fruit of actions that we have done with desire in previous lives. So whatever we may think now, by our will, is not going to change anything. We cannot change our prarabdha in any way whatsoever. So, but people have many ideas that if you've got positive thoughts, positive things will happen to you. If you've got negative thoughts, negative things will happen to you. There's even, they call the law of attraction. But if you're always thinking positive things will happen to you. If you always think that you can think positively about money, think that if you work hard, you'll get money, money will come. But if you're always doubting, oh, money, even though I work hard, I may not get the money, then the money won't come because of your negative way of thinking. People have so many beliefs like this. None of these beliefs have compatible with Bhagavan's teachings. According to Bhagavan, what is not destined to happen will not happen, however much effort you make. What is destined to happen will not stop, however much you try to obstruct it. Bhagavan clearly wrote in that note to his mother. So whatever happens in our life is according to prarabdha. It has nothing, we cannot do anything to change it, or we cannot experience anything that we are not destined to experience, or avoid experiencing anything that we are destined to experience. That doesn't mean that our will is not playing its part, but the thing is, though our will may be playing its part, it cannot actually change prarabdha. So what is happening according to prarabdha will happen irrespective of our desires. You were asking about unconscious thoughts. This again is Bhagavan never talked about unconscious thoughts. According to Bhagavan, nothing exists independent of our awareness of it. So when we talk about unconscious thoughts, how do we know unconscious thoughts exist? That is, unconscious thoughts are just an idea that we have. That is, psychologists may be able to explain certain things by saying, oh, there were unconscious thoughts there. But if it was unconscious, how do we know that it was there? It's just a theory. It's just a belief. So this is what Bhagavan said. We've got to unlearn. We've got to remove all these old ideas. What Bhagavan has taught us is something very, very simple. There is subject and there is object. Subject is ego. All phenomena, all forms, all thoughts, everything is just their objects. They're things other than I. Those things other than I, where do they come from? They come from they don't exist independent of our perception of them. Just like in dream, whatever we experience in a dream, nothing exists in dream independent of our perception of it. So we don't think, oh, in dream, because of an unconscious thought, a monster came there. The monster came there only when we were conscious of it. It's our projection. We can argue, but I mean, some people try to equate vasanas with the psychological idea of unconscious thoughts, but vasanas are not. Vasanas are, Bhagavan compared them to seeds. Seeds are, if you've got the seed of, say, a mango tree, that you're from that seed, that there's no mangoes in that seed. You have to plant the seed, it has to sprout, and then only it becomes a mango. So the vasanas, we are aware of our vasanas when they manifest. We're aware of when they manifest in the form of desires, likes, dislikes, and so on. Otherwise, they're remaining in seed form. So, it's quite a different idea to the idea that there are thoughts going on in the background, but you're unconscious of them. There's no room for that in Bhagavan's teaching. The vasanas are either there in seed form or they sprout. If they sprout, we're aware of them. If they don't sprout, in a way, we are still aware of them. I know I have an inclination to like a certain thing. I may not now be dwelling on it, thinking, I like chocolate, I want chocolate. But I know from previous experience that I have that, if I see a bar of chocolate in front of me, I will want to eat it because I like chocolate. So like that, we may not at this very moment be aware of the vasanas, but we are in a sense aware of the presence of these inclinations. Sometimes during the course of our spiritual practice, vasanas may manifest that we may say, oh, I became aware of vasanas that I wasn't even aware of before. But even that is not quite true. We may become freshly aware of the strength of certain vasanas, but in a sense, we're always aware of what vasanas are there, because ultimately the vasanas are our inclination to go outwards. They may take different forms, that it may be a desire for this one, a desire for that, but it's all a desire for something other than ourselves.
I'm referring, Michael, to these cases that you said, when it's necessary the synchronicity of our will and prarabdha. in these cases, for example, maybe I am not aware about what desire and what vasana are operating, are moving me to want something. No, maybe I don't know why I have an impulse to desire something, and this impulse contribute with the prarabdha to a final event, no,
Yes.
in my life, no.
Yes.
And in when I begin to are more aware about these vasanas in operation in my life, uh, mm, I can't avoid the result, no, because if it is happen to happen, it will
Yes.
happen.
Yes. Yes.
But maybe I can stay in a position more disaffected, more in peace.
Yeah. Yeah. That is sometimes certain things that are destined to happen, may want those things to happen. So in that case, our will and it, for example, supposing it's my destiny to win 1,000 euros in a lottery. I'm walking along and I pass a shop and I think, oh, I don't usually buy lottery tickets, but let me buy one today just to try my luck. And I go in and I buy the lottery ticket and I buy the ticket and I win 1,000 euros. So I'm very happy. I could not have bought that. I would not have bought that ticket, and it would not have been the winning ticket if it hadn't been my prarabdha. But it just so happens that because we all generally have a liking for money, that destiny coincided with what I like. So, but I cannot say, but because of my desire for 1,000 euros, I won it. Because so many times we may desire 1,000 euros. There may have been times when we were in much worse financial circumstances where we would have had much more desire for 1,000 euros, but it wasn't our destiny, it didn't come. So though sometimes the will and the destiny may be working in parallel, working in sync, but they're not the cause of each other. It's just a what do they call it? A two things happening in conjunction doesn't necessarily mean, but if A and B happen together, doesn't mean A is the cause of B or B is the cause of A. In this case, the prarabdha is already determined. It's not affected at all by what we now desire or don't desire. Sometimes our desires may be in sync with what is destined to happen. Sometimes they may be opposed to what is destined to happen. But in either case, it doesn't affect what is destined to happen. What is destined to happen is going to happen. So when we are following Bhagavan's path, our aim should be to turn our attention more and more within. The more our attention is turned within, the more we are weakening the outgoing vasanas, that's the Vishaya vasanas. The more the outgoing Vishaya vasanas are weakened, the less we will be acting according to our will. We'll be coming closer to what Bhagavan referred to in the final sentence of that note to his mother when he said, therefore, being silent is good. Being silent doesn't mean doing nothing, because the body, speech, and mind will do whatever they're destined to do. Being silent means not rising as ego with desire for this or that.
You became absolutely aware that not react to anything is the best, because
yes,
whatever you want to
yes.
do, whatever you want to desire, whatever you want to, finally it will happen. What
but
will happen.
we will be aware of that. That awareness is an inner clarity. That is the clarity of viveka. That clarity of viveka will come to the extent to which we turn our mind within. So our sole aim in when we're following Bhagavan's path should be to turn our attention more and more within. We shouldn't think, oh, I need to develop this this clarity, I need to develop this judgment, I need to understand these things. Simply, that is when our mind is outgoing, we think about Bhagavan's teachings to reinforce and our desire to turn within. And then we turn within more and more and more. As we turn within more and more and more, our mind is purified and it becomes more and more clear to us. But whatever is happening according to prarabdha. We need not be concerned about these things because we cannot change these things at all. Whether a good prarabdha is coming or a bad prarabdha is coming, we cannot do anything to change it in any way whatsoever. So by the clarity gained by self-investigation, we become indifferent to these external things. And therefore we are less affected by them. Because if you're not concerned, well, one day you may win 1,000 euros. Next day you may lose 1,000 euros. If you understand that these things are all according to prarabdha. Understand means not just understanding at the thought level. Understand by deep inner clarity. But whatever happens is according to destiny. You will not be concerned when you win 1,000 euro or when you lose 1,000 euro. It all just goes on according to destiny. It's all just part of a passing show.
So Michael, in the example,
that inner detachment is gained to the extent to which we turn our attention within. That is why Bhagavan is constantly stressing, turning our attention within. That is the axle around which all Bhagavan teachings are evolving, is this one point, ahamukam, turning within, facing eyewards. So everything that Bhagavan has taught us is linking to that axle.
And Michael, going back to the original topic of money and so on, if for example a person who became a millionaire,
yes,
they say that if you ask him or if you ask them how they got the money, how they achieved all the money and so on, they might say, oh, I worked very hard, I had to study a lot, I had to do this, as if he had done all that and that was the cause of all the money and so on. So maybe that was even his desire to obtain all that money, to get all the money, but he won all the money because of the prarabdha that made him. It was very the prarabdha and his desire were aligned in a way.
Yeah. But there's so many people in this world who desire to have $1 million.
Yeah.
Only a few people get $1 million. So, and those people who say, "Oh, I got all this. I worked hard, and so I deserve all this." Even that is not true because the other people may be working even harder, but they don't get it. So it's all according to prarabdha.
Yeah, exactly. So if your will might be the same as your prarabdha, it might coincide, but it's not because of your will, it's because of the prarabdha.
It's because of the prarabdha.
Always.
Yeah.
Always, ultimately.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you arrive at the absolute recognition that only and always the will of Bhagavan is being fulfilled. And you can come to recognize, includes emotionally, I speak you that because I feel in my experience, recognize emotionally what is the next step of the will of Bhagavan in our life, and no need to choose anything about it as an I, because you recognize in the emotion no an emotion that comes from the ego, that comes from the consciousness. You feel that now what is going to happen is to the right and not to the left, and you make a fiction that you decide go to the right, knowing that this decision is given for him.
Yes, but that is when our attention is not turned within, when it's turned outwards, we are thinking so many things and we may be deciding so many things, but we cannot know which decisions are according to destiny and which decisions are according to our will. Some decisions may be according to both. So this need not be, it need not concern us whether the decisions we make are according to our will or our destiny. Is not, again, this is all something anya, something outside ourselves, something other than ourselves. Our concern should be only about attending to ourselves. So our aim is to turn our attention more and more within. If we turn our attention more and more within, our will be operating less and less in an outward going way. So whatever happens whatever actions are done by this body, speech, or mind will be according to destiny only. If we're really turning within, if we've really surrendered ourselves. But most of us, we haven't yet reached, we are still possibly quite far from being willing to surrender ourselves to that extent. So our will is still operating, our will is still driving our mind here and there, and accordingly, the mind is driving the speech and the body. So many actions are going on in our life, and their mixture, they're being driven by these two forces, our will and our destiny. And we cannot judge which are to what extent each action is being driven by destiny or being driven by a will. And this need not concern us, because this is all an Atma-vichara. It's investigating or inquiring about things other than ourselves. Destiny is other than ourselves. Our will, our desires, they're other than ourselves. So we shouldn't be concerned about our desires. If we turn our attention within, but we are thereby automatically weakening our desires.
And consequently of this go inside more and more, you don't detect an individual will.
No, the more you turn within, the more clearly you will see.
Who has this will?
The individual will is the vasanas. So until the individual will comes to an end only when ego comes to an end. So long as we rise as ego, we have desires, likes, dislikes, and so on. And the more we try and turn within, the more clearly you'll be aware of the strength of our desires and attachments and likes and dislikes. But the more we turn within, the more they'll be growing weaker and weaker and weaker. It's like a plant. A plant thrives if you water it, but if you don't water it, it withers and dies. Desires and attachments and vasanas are like that. If we water them with our attention, they thrive. If we deprive them of the water of our attention, they wither and die. So if we're turning our attention within, we are depriving them of the water of our attention. But because we are not able to, we don't yet have sufficient love to attend only to ourselves. When we turn within, we find that our mind is constantly being pulled outwards by our desires and attachments, our vasanas, in other words. So we're clearly aware of the presence of the vasanas there, but we don't allow ourselves to lament, oh, I've got so many vasanas, how can I ever get rid of these vasanas? As Bhagavan said, instead of lamenting like that, we should cling tenaciously. Vida pidiyai pidika vendam, swarupa dhyanate vida pidiyai pidika vendam. He says in Tamil, it's an extremely, that's in the 10th paragraph of Who Am I? He says it's the words in Tamil are very, very emphatic. Vida pidiyai pidika vendam. That means very, literally it means vida pidiyai, unleavingly, that is clinging, unleavingly clingingly to, is the closest we can say. I mean, it's not possible to say it in English, but in English, we just translate vida pidiyai tenaciously, because that's the closest English word we have to it. But in Tamil, it's a very expressive way Bhagavan says it. So we have to cling tenaciously to that self-attentiveness. The more we cling to the self-attentiveness, the more the vasanas will lose their strength. And the more they lose their strength, the more we'll be able to cling tenaciously to the self-attentiveness. So that should be, that is Bhagavan has given us extremely simple teachings. He's given us an extremely simple task to do. You have only one thing to do: cling to self-attentiveness. That is all that is required. If we cling to that, he says in the next paragraph, in the 11th paragraph, if one clings firmly to self swarupa smarane. Swarupa smarane literally means remembrance of one's real nature, or self-remembrance. If one clings to self-remembrance, that's another way of saying self-attentiveness. If one clings uninterruptedly to self-attentiveness till one attains one's real nature, adu andre podum, that alone is sufficient. So that Bhagavan's entire teachings is about this clinging to self-attentiveness. If we remember that is our sole aim, the more we do that, the more all the other teachings become clear. They all fall into place. So we really don't have to think about a lot of other things. That's why Bhagavan said, in this path, it's not about learning, it's about unlearning. It's about getting rid of all our wrong ideas. The only thing we need to do is be self-attentive, because being self-attentive is itself surrendering ourselves completely to God.